So, doing a review here, I've got an 80s slasher for you this time, Symphony of Evil, as you can see here, which is actually better known as Coda. But I've never actually been able to find it under the Coda name. If you ever search for this film, it always seems to come up as Symphony of Evil. Indeed, the most common thing that will come up when you look for it is a German VHS tape, which doesn't actually have any kind of English language as far as I know, so you wouldn't really want to buy that unless you're super desperate. But a few months back I was fortunate enough to come across this English version, which does have English language, so I snapped it up, got around to watching it last night, so I thought I'd do a review. But yeah, never released on DVD as far as I know. It's an Australian film, directed by Craig Layhiff, hopefully I'm pronouncing that surname correctly. 1987 in Australia, might have been a year or two later in the States and UK, but that's the front obviously. The spine looks like that, and that's the reverse cover art, so that's the sleeve, some stills from the film there on the reverse. That's the VHS sleeve. I'm going to go into the story now. Before I do, I'll just briefly mention that with it being obviously a VHS, there are no special features to speak of. So let's get into the story now, and it begins with an attempted murder of a music student who is assaulted in an apartment before being thrown from a high window and then left for dead. The victim's best friend is then introduced, a fellow music student named Kate, who happens to live in the same apartment building, and she soon becomes integral to the situation when her ex-husband comes under suspicion, I should say, as the prime suspect in this assault. And in an attempt to clear his name, as well as avenge her best friend, who later is finished off incidentally in the hospital and actually killed as she's on life support. So in an attempt to clear her husband's name and avenge her friend's death, she teams up with a new neighbour and tries to solve the case herself. But this of course puts her very much in the crosshairs of the killer, who kind of lines her up then as his next victim, or her next victim, whoever it might be, who the killer is. Good points, and the first thing that I've got for this one is the killer is effectively attired with a long wooden looking black trench coat type outfit, finished off with a creepy plastic mask of what looks to be a man's face. And you can actually see the mask on the back here in that top picture. It's a bit shadowy so you can't see it great, but that's the mask. Maybe looks a bit generic, a bit simple, but despite its simplicity it works well. It looks kind of creepy in the film, so they do a good job with that, despite the what on the surface maybe feels a bit simple, like I say, but it does work well, take my word for it. And in fact the whole look of the killer actually reminded me quite a lot of the villain from Valentine, so perhaps that later film took some inspiration maybe from this, because the trench coat looked almost identical to me, and even the cherub mask from Valentine looked kind of similar to the mask here from a distance. So yeah, if you like the killer there, then you'll probably like the killer here too. Next good point that I've got is that, well, first thing is just some background, and this is kind of a smaller and older cast than what we normally have in these kind of films. Even though the final girl is a student, she's more of like a mature student, so a bit older than the rest of their classmates. And it's more of an adult slasher as a result, I would say, kind of more in the vein of, say, like a Curtains. It styles itself kind of as a thriller at times even, but it's got a largely female cast and they do shine. And this comes to the good point now. It's made of a kind of four key cast members: the final girl Kate, her new neighbour and friend Sally, a female police detective called Detective Turner, and a music professor called Dr. Steiner. And all four of these impress in their roles. Kind of they do excel and kind of carry the film on their backs and do a really good job. So despite the minimal characters, the good acting really makes it work. So that's the second good point. The third and final good point that I've got is that on several occasions there are some nicely paced and directed chase or cat and mouse style sequences which are well done and tension filled, and particularly in a scene at the opera where the girls are being stalked there, and then later at a swimming pool where at their new apartment complex where the similar kind of stalking happens. That's good as well. And the climax at a university after hours sort of among the library of the university is also nicely tension filled, nicely shot, nicely done. The only sort of minor blemish with that, towards the end, this kind of scene at the university, is that it is quite dark at this point and you can't really always see exactly what's going on, but I think it's down to it just being an old VHS tape more than anything. The quality is not very good, but if it was to ever get a Blu-ray or DVD release and it was to get cleaned up and enhanced and restored, that kind of thing, you probably sort the problem out. But be aware that it is a little bit dark and hard to see what's going on at the very end, but still a good sort of high tension finish to things, so they do a good job with it overall in that area for sure. I'm moving on to the negatives now for me, and I'm not completely sure about this, but I think it may have initially been a TV movie in its native Australia, and it definitely does kind of look like that, if indeed it is, especially when it comes to in this one area, and that's when it comes to the kills, which unfortunately to say are very disappointing, very below par. It's not quite as bad as other TV and as fellow TV movie Deadly Lessons, if you've seen that. That was really bad when it came to the murders, but this one's slightly better than that, but it's kind of still in the same ballpark as being very underwhelming in that area, so be aware of that. Not very much blood, it's not really very visceral when it comes to the kills, so not a lot to get excited about there. And also the middle section of the film is a bit not very well paced, in that there's not many there's no murders for the whole middle section. There's like one at the beginning and then several at the end, but the whole middle, nothing to speak of. So it could have been better paced there with like an extra murder thrown in to liven things up perhaps. So yeah, they could have done a better job with the pacing of it in that regard, and thrown in like an extra murder or two in the middle section. Next bad point that I have, and the first victim near the beginning is discovered with a key in her hand. And this key goes on to become quite a main plot point for the first half to even maybe the first 2/3 of the film. But this plot device for me, in my opinion, was ultimately bungled, as when it's finally revealed what the key unlocks, it felt very unimportant to me and didn't really tie in with the plot that much. It was a bit underwhelming. It didn't seem to have quite as much significance to it as I thought it would, to the point that it had been built up to that point as being really important, but then when it's finally used to unlock something, it's not that big of a plot revelation, so it didn't really enhance things or explain things too much, so it kind of fell flat for me a little bit. It wasn't quite as good as I was expecting. And the last bad point that I've got, and this is kind of in a similar vein to what I've been talking about with the script, is that the explanation at the end when the killer is revealed as to what the motivation was a bit lackluster. Maybe it's me being just a bit dim, but on first watch and first listen I didn't even fully understand it really. I didn't completely grasp what they were trying to put across. It's quite a bit like muddled, a bit confusing. Maybe it's just me, but I didn't think it really explained things very well. Felt a bit threadbare and didn't completely kind of reveal why the killer was doing what they were doing. At least not for me. Maybe it's to some it would be fine, but for me it didn't really kind of explain things too much. They could have perhaps done a better job there of tying it all together at the end. That's it for the bad points. Going on to my verdict now. I did have high expectations for this one going in because I'd read quite a lot of praise for it beforehand, and in fairness it did live up to those expectations for the most part. It's a very well made, polished film, very well directed in places, certainly when it comes to the tension and the kind of like the chase sequences. The director certainly knows how to ratchet up the tension in those particular parts, but on the negative it's a bit lackluster, a bit disappointing when it comes to the murders. They're not very well paced out and like spaced out throughout the film. They're underwhelming and disappointing when they actually do happen for the most part. And there's a few issues here and there with the script, nothing major, but some little things that you could be improved on, tightened up perhaps. But overall, though, I did have a decent, more than a decent time with it. It was pretty good. Perhaps a tad overrated overall, but still very well worth your time. If you can find a copy, then I definitely recommend that you grab it. Being quite a sought after film among collectors too, it's a nice one to have on the shelf due to its scarcity, its rarity. So yeah, definitely worth tracking down. So overall, then we're going to give this a 7 out of 10. That's my final verdict, my final score. And I'll put a body count or kill count if you prefer in the description, so feel free to check that out, but obviously it will contain spoilers. Alright, thanks for watching and goodbye.